Saint John Vianney was a country priest in the Napoleonic period in France. He felt called to the priesthood, but struggled with Latin and needed private tutoring to supplement his lack of a formal education. In 1818, Jean became priest of the small village and parish of Ars in central France, which over time he made into a model parish, and from which reports of his holiness and his supernatural powers soon spread. He was known for his devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and he was dedicated to the sacrament of reconciliation, confession, for his parishioners to begin with. But by 1827, Ars had become a site of pilgrimage, and every year from 1845 until Vianney's death, about 20,000 persons visited Ars to see Vianney and especially to make their confession to him. Eventually, they were coming from as far away as America and from all over Europe and elsewhere. This holy priest spent as many as 12 or 15 hours a day in his confessional. Now, there's a story he tells of an old farmer that he found sitting in his church time after time, simply sitting, staring at the tabernacle of the reserved sacrament on the high altar. Jean asked him what he was doing, and the man explained, "I look at him and he looks at me." This was a story that Saint Jean Vianney told with a purpose, to make us ask ourselves the question, can we do that? Simply being still and contemplating. In the first reading for the 16th Sunday of Ordinary Time this year, the Lord appears to Abraham in the guise of three strangers, three messengers, and he welcomes them under the shade of the oak of Mamre, where he has pitched his camp and has been sitting in the door of his tent in the heat of the afternoon. He welcomes these strangers with the customary generous hospitality of a wandering nomad, which Abraham was at that time, and they bring him extraordinary news. His wife Sarah, thought to be beyond the age of childbearing, will bear a son. Luke's Gospel for that day, the 16th Sunday of Ordinary Time, introduces us to Martha and Mary, the sisters of Lazarus, whom Christ was to raise from the grave later on. This is in chapter 10, and it's straight after the parable of the Good Samaritan. And both stories, the parable and this real-time narrative, these are unique to Luke, and we should be glad that Luke has recorded them for us. Here's the story as he tells it. Jesus came to a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. She had a sister called Mary, who sat down at the Lord's feet and listened to him speaking. Now Martha, who was distracted with all the serving, said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister is leaving me to do the serving all by myself? Please tell her to help me." But the Lord answered, "Martha, Martha," he said, "you worry and fret about so many things, yet few are needed. Indeed, only one. It is Mary who has chosen the better part. It is not to be taken from her." The story of the Samaritan opens with the words, "a certain man." Today's the reading for the same day from the Gospel of Luke opens with the words in the Greek, "a certain woman," referring to Martha. The Samaritan is an example of how a disciple should see and act. Mary is an example of how a disciple should listen. Mary, a woman, is a marginalized person in the society of her time, like the Samaritan. Both do what is not expected of them. As a woman, Mary would be expected, like Martha, to prepare hospitality for the honoured guest. Here again, as so often, Jesus breaks with the social conventions of his time. Just as a Samaritan would not be, for Jesus' hearers, a model for neighbourliness, so a woman would not sit with the men around the feet of a teacher. Both stories teach us how a disciple is to fulfill the dual command with which chapter 10 St. Luke begins. The conversation about the love of God and the love of neighbour. These two commands are the greatest of all, the two essentials of life in the kingdom of God. The kingdom already dawning, but yet to be fulfilled in the future in its fullness. By using the examples of a Samaritan and a woman, Jesus is saying something more, something quite radical about love of God and love of neighbour. Social codes and boundaries were strict in Jesus' time. Yet, to love God with all one's heart and one's neighbour as oneself may mean, from time to time, rising above such rules and conventions as may exist. The kingdom of God is a society without distinctions and boundaries between its members. It is a society that requires times for seeing and doing, and also times for listening and learning at the feet of a teacher. Now, this story, the story of Martha and Mary, has in times past been used by some commentators to suggest that we should value contemplation above action, prayer above service. But this can't be right. We need both. How to get the balance right? It may be that in times past, people commended the contemplative life, the monastic life, the enclosed life, sometimes the solitary life, as worthy of high regard, being, as it were, shut away from the world. But actually, we need both. We need service as well as prayer. And the rule of St. Benedict, for example, emphasizes both. It emphasizes work as prayer and prayer as a work, the opus Dei, the work of God, and to have both. And Benedictines have a great tradition of hospitality to the stranger. So there's a balance. Benedict was very concerned to avoid the kind of fanaticism that could develop amongst those who fled the world to draw closer to God. So how to get the balance right? The problem with Martha is not, it seems, it's not that she is busy serving and providing hospitality. Her problem, it seems, is that she is worried and distracted. Periespato, the Greek word, suggests being pulled or dragged in different directions. Martha's anxiety leaves no room for the most important thing, gracious attention to the guest. In fact, she tries to embarrass her sister in front of her guest by asking the guest to intervene. Lord, do you not care? Tell her to help me. Understandably, anxiety can make us irrational, and it's understandable when that happens. Martha wants the best, but Jesus gently chides her. He's not harsh with her. His words to her are an invitation rather than a rebuke. Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. The one thing needed for Martha just then is to receive the gracious presence of Jesus, to listen to his words. Perhaps those words included, I only need a sandwich. But to listen to his words, to know that she is valued not for what she does or how well she does it, but much more for who she is as a child of God. So, am I a Martha or a Mary? Are you a Martha or a Mary? Are you a more practical, active person, or are you the quieter, contemplative type? Well, I think we all know that we all have a bit of each in us. Maybe the question for us may be, do we have a right balance between the two? To be honest with you, I am not a very practical person, but that doesn't by itself make me a natural contemplative. Instead, I am, if you like, a mental Martha. I get very absorbed and caught up in mental activity, sometimes to the point of being distracted. It's not quite attention deficit disorder, but you know what I mean. If, like me, you find it difficult to be still in the presence of God, there is help at hand. Above all, the Mass is there to bring us closer to Christ. Yes, we know that. The words and the actions and the music, if there's music, to bring us closer to Christ and still our hearts in his presence. And strangely enough, the words and actions, the readings, the prayers, the music, if there's music, the responses, the communion, these can all be a vehicle for moving towards being still in our hearts. Of course, there are practical steps of preparation one can make before the Eucharist begins. Yes, we greet one another on arrival, perhaps, but to find space and time to just be quiet. There'll be plenty of time after Mass to talk, and we enjoy that. And it's part of the hospitality thing, especially talking to the stranger, person we don't know. These are practical steps of preparation which can all lead into the stillness. The old farmer of Arles found another parallel way. In just sitting and looking, he found a certain stillness, a stilling of the mind. And of course, with Eucharistic adoration and benediction, when the Blessed Sacrament is exposed for adoration, that's something we can all try to do and see how it works for us. Many people find it very helpful. But these various ways, and it also includes how we turn to prayer in our own room, in our own place, at home, or wherever it may be. And all this bear fruit in practical ways. Some people find it helpful to have a rosary or to recite the Jesus prayer in one or other of its forms as a way of stilling the mind. But in the end, all of this is about grace, divine grace. God reaching out to us, that we might reach out to him. And I've spoken about this before, about grace, I mean. Grace is not some kind of power socket you plug into. No, it's about God reaching out to us. It's a personal gift. It's an invitation to us to be friends with God, an invitation which itself brings the ability to respond, enabling us to respond, empowering without compelling, just as God did in the angel's visit, Gabriel's visit to Mary, where she was given grace, freedom to say yes, perfectly free of any impediment, any cramping of her freedom. That's what grace is. The invitation itself empowers us if we're willing to reach out. And so it was too, long, long ago, in the Lord's visit to Abraham, our father in faith.